Oh, there's another person there. All right, everyone, please check the chat. You will see a link there. Please check that link. There's a playlist there that we're going to use with a bunch of videos. We're going to analyze a few of those. Before that, I have two. Before that, we have two more things. First, I'm going to run you guys through a few basic principles regarding how to coach the snatch, clean, and jerk, and go through a few questions that people sent in before this webinar. Not a lot, so we can go through that pretty quickly. What we're starting with is that story I mentioned about, basically the process of coaching a snatch, clean, or jerk. There's a few steps in there. And the first thing it requires is some basic knowledge on the movement, like how does the movement work? Well, this is not the place to do that. I will assume that if you are a coach, you will know those things. And if you're an athlete, just bear with me for the next minute before we go into the fun stuff. When you coach, the first thing you do is observe. So you look at what happens. You look at the overall flow of the movement, but you also need to contextualize. So if you see a weightlifter snatching, that weightlifter probably has higher standards for the snatch because he needs to lift the most weight he can. Whereas a martial artist who does a clean, for example, just as sport-specific strength training or power training, the standards for technique are probably not as high because it requires a lot of time to perfect your technique, but the returns on investment are not that great there. So you need to keep that in mind as you look at someone lifting, right? So you observe, and if you are not entirely sure what's going on, you might need to zoom in. So you look at a second lift from that same athlete and you zoom in a little on a specific thing that might be interesting. What you're doing there is you are reverse engineering. So you're looking at the symptom, the outcome of the lift, and you're looking back and trying to see all the different parts in the movement that influence it. Everything that happens in a lift is a result of what happens before that. So a simple example, someone does a snatch, they miss the lift out in front. Well, why was that? Did the athlete actively not keep the bar close enough? That is possible. Maybe there was a bigger issue somewhere earlier in the lift. Maybe the athlete had a stripper move, where the hips shoot up, stuff like that. That's something you need to look at. And then comes the hard part. You need to cue the athlete into fixing that issue. Could be with a cue, could be with a specific exercise you have them do, and so on. That's something we'll get into a bit as well. So what we're trying to do here is go through these steps, look at what happens, look at what we think is the issue, and come up with suggestions to fix that specific issue. Also leads me to the first question, because there was a question from, let's see here, from Susanna, who asks what to focus on when giving specific cues to an athlete. Well, there's a lot of factors that go into it, obviously, but the main thing when what you should focus on when giving a cue to an athlete is meet the athlete where they're at. If I have a complete beginner, I am not going to explain to them how the quads and the glutes all work in concert to make sure that the force exerted is mostly vertical rather than horizontal. That is just going to go over their head. They're not going to understand. It's not going to fix their lift. Complete beginner who has a stick in their hands, I might tell them to jump because then they understand they need to move vertically, right? So that is meeting the athlete where they're at. If I have an athlete who is more experienced, who understands the movements, I might go more in depth, especially if I'm trying to fix a detail with an athlete. I might tell them, hey, I see that your balance on the feet is off. Right when you cross the knees, you need to focus more on pushing your toes down. That could be something a little bit more elaborate. That's not something you explain to a beginner where you're happy, where they can have a straight back to begin with. You see this in CrossFit, especially when someone comes in for the first time and they've never done sports in their life. They can't even do a decent good morning or deadlift with a stick. So how are they going to worry about their exact foot balance at a very specific time during something as complicated as a snatch? So my main advice would be meet the athlete where they're at. Don't overcomplicate things. Only tell them what they need to know. If you want to learn more, do that outside of training. Other than that, of course, there's a lot of other stuff that kind of goes outside the scope of this. But if you focus on the meet the athlete where they're at, you're probably already well on your way to actually helping people instead of showing off your knowledge on the lift, right? Another question. I think we had this question last week. I think that maybe he wasn't there last time. I think he's not here either, right? I'm just going to skip that question. There was another question from Marilene about how to get under a snatch or a clean very fast instead of sinking down slowly. The heavier the weight, the slower I go down. Um, this is a tough one because this depends on a lot of factors. If you're very slow under the bar, there could be a few things going on. Perhaps you're initiating the second pull, so the explosion, too early, because if you do that, you'll have a very long second pull, getting your hips to the bar goes out in front. It takes a while before you're done extending and before you go down. That's one possibility. Two, you're simply elevating the bar too much. Because if you do a snatch and you lift the bar 6 feet into the air, then you don't have to get under the bar much, right? Especially if you're not very tall. But if you lift the bar specifically onto the point of your overhead squat, then you need to be fast under the bar. So it could be a thing of effort should match intensity. So if it's light, well, you just need to go a little less hard. You can still move fast, but you don't want to throw the bar that far out in the air. It could also be a thing. And of course, there is the mental factor. Perhaps you're strong enough and you have the technique down, but as soon as it gets heavier, you get afraid of the weight. So that might also be an issue. I have videos from your lifting that you sent in. Unfortunately, last time we had a bit of an issue with actually sharing the video. So I will make another attempt in a bit, see if it works. Otherwise, we'll have to skip out on your video and I'll get back to you personally later on. What we're going to do next is we're going to go into a bunch of videos. So please check the chat. In the chat, you will find that link. There's the YouTube playlist. There you will find the videos that we're going to go through. Oh, there is the person who had the last question. Welcome, Frank. We'll go into your question now very quickly. Please mute yourself before I do so. There we go. Thank you, Frank. Frank had the question about what is the minimal amount of weightlifting you need to do to maintain your level. It depends on how proficient you are, because if you're very proficient, you don't need a lot to maintain it. That is one. It goes for your strength level, it goes for your technique level, and so on. Now, assuming that you still do strength work in general, you do still your squats and deadlifts and presses, whatever, assuming you have a decent amount of technique, I would say twice a week, do some weightlifting, because explosiveness and speed tend to deteriorate pretty quickly after only a few days already. So unless you're already doing lots of jumps and plyometrics and heavy kettlebell swings and other medium intensity lifting work, I recommend doing weightlifting at least twice a week. It doesn't have to be much, just a few working sets could already be enough of any variation, pulls, snatches, power snatches, or cleans, or whatever. Basically, for all those things, twice a week is a nice guideline, right, for speed work in general. Goes for power as well. For those that don't know, power is basically halfway between speed and strength. Throwing a ball is speed. Doing a kettlebell swing with 8 kilos is speed. And strength is doing a 1-rep max deadlift. Somewhere halfway, you will find power, explosiveness, which is a sprint or a power clean, for example. So there's something we call, would you focus on the 80% match range? Frank asks on what percentage you would focus. Depends on a lot of factors because basically it depends on the rest of your workouts during the week. Long story short, to be strong and explosive and fast and all those things, you want to ride the curve. There is a curve which goes from fast to strong. Basically, if you're very fast, there's very little weight. But if you use a lot of weight, you get slower. So there's like this curve with the exact power output. You want to ride the curve. What does that mean? That means you need to train at all those intensities. So if you train at, I'll do a lot of strength work, then you do not have to go super heavy on your cleans and snatches. You could stay around the 80%, for example. But if you already do a lot of medium to high intensity explosive work, then I would do more lifts at a lighter percentage, like 60 to 80%. I usually don't count sets under 60% because the stimulus is relatively small. And if I want something super light, low impact, assuming that it's not technique work, I would just go for, jumping variations, for example, right? So assume everyone has a link now. Please click the link. So we will go into the first few videos. So what we're going to do is please take a look at the playlist and scroll all the way down. You should see the video Weightlifting World Championship 2009, 75 kilos, Svetlana Podebyedova. She was in the 75 kilos category. She was an Olympic medalist. want you to click on that video, go to her lift at 2 minutes and 4 seconds, and look at that video a few times, right? Can't really share my screen because that messes up the whole speed and all that. Just take a look at her lift a few times, 3 or 4 times in a row, and see what occurs to you. I'm not going to analyze everything of the lift. I just want you guys to look at a few elements of it. I'm just going to discuss one or two. All right, once you've seen that video 2 or 3 or 4 times, I want you guys to put in the chat what occurs to you. What occurs to you in general? Is there something specifically very good or very bad about the lift? Something that you think is weird? And kind of pretend like this is something you would see in a beginning lifter. So if you're a coach, you would have someone who might lift for like a few months, relatively new. You see this person doing that. What would occur to you when you see that? All right, the first 3 comments already pick one of the obvious things. Her feet are super close, very narrow opening stance. Yeah, that's true. Looks a bit squatty from the start position. Yes, she is kind of in a very narrow stance squat. Okay, so you see this. This is like the observation thing. Now, then you have to put it in context. We're looking at an elite level lifter, right? So an elite level lifter who is at the Olympics may not want to make huge differences in their technique because it may cause more issues than it solves. However, most of us are not coaching Olympic athletes in weightlifting. So let us assume that this is someone who has some experience, not a lot. This is a lady who can can snatch 60 kilos with this technique. And you see this. Why is this an issue? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? She has a very narrow opening stance, but why is that a good or bad thing, right? Hit me with your best idea. Or if you have a very elaborate story, just unmute yourself and let people know in the chat that you're going to speak. So we don't have 10 people speaking at the same time.
Come on, guys, you can do it.
Yeah, I forgot Cecily is here as well.
You just want to know what we would suggest?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I basically want to know what you guys think of that position. Do you think it's a good thing, the bad thing? If you would have this athlete that snatches 60 kilos, would you say this is a good thing?
Well, mostly I would recommend it to people that find it hard to have the right ending position with the feet quite close enough to keep in balance. So if people are quite wide, then I would say just start more narrow. So as soon as they're landing, then they are like very wide. So then I would cue them like starting position can be a little bit more narrow.
Okay, so you would basically say if the starting position is more narrow, then hopefully the ending position is also narrower.
Narrower, but in the end, it's like a standard distance. So yeah. So if people sometimes people are feeling more comfortable to open their legs more. Mm-hmm. Like wider than they used to do. So yeah, then for people that are seeing that, like, okay, we can start more smaller. So then yeah, you have like for the ending position it's the same, but for the starting, yeah, whatever feels good to you. That's what I suggest.
Okay. Anyone else have an opinion on that? Because this is an interesting idea. Basically, you're relating the starting position to the ending position of the feet. And yes, you can play around a lot with that. I'm very curious to see what other people think of it. I see several comments here. Let's see. I see several comments here about the power in the floor. Both Cora and Daphne say she may have more leg power if she goes wider. So the thing here is that basically everything that is stacked. So if you have the knees above the ankles, for example, that is what we call stacked. There are 2 joints on top of each other. The more stacked a joint is, the stronger it basically is. Why? Well, the principle is very simple. If this is a tower, you don't need a lot of power to keep this tower upright. But the more it goes forward, the more power you need to, force you need to make sure it doesn't fall over. It's the same as with my arms. If I just hold the weight here, it's now pretty stacked on top of my chest, no problem. If I keep the weight here, it's far away from me. It's very hard to maintain that position. So that it means something is stacked or it's far away from you. The further away it is from you, the more torque there is on the joint. So in this particular example, there's a lot of torque on the shoulder joint. Now, is that a problem? No, it just costs more effort. So if my feet are in a suboptimal, non-stacked position, that means I need to exert more force. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it just means something you need to keep in mind. So in theory, if your heels are under your knees, your ankles are under your knees and your knees are under your hips, that is the most powerful position you can have to drive into the floor. So in theory, and again, this is textbook technique when we're talking about, the lady in the video has a too narrow stance because she can exert less force. Why? Because the joints are not completely stacked. So she needs to provide force from somewhere to make sure that she has enough power in getting up. Well, obviously this lady is very strong, so for her it's not an issue, but it is not textbook technique. And basically the textbook technique is the framework I recommend people work with. And within that, you need to play around a bit and see what works for people. Because what if I say, oh yeah, but this is like the textbook perfect technique and the person isn't mobile enough for that? Or like Susanna mentioned earlier, like what if they're not very comfortable with that? Are you going to force them in that position? That's something you have to play around with. And again, depending on the person. Sometimes we'll say, hey, I don't care, it's uncomfortable. You need to get used to it, or you need to improve your mobility. Apparently with this athlete, I don't know why, I've never really talked to her coach or seen interviews of her coach or whatever. I don't know why they let her get away with this, but apparently it works for her. Plus, what also happens is that, I think it was Frank who said, yeah, it looks a bit squatty from the start. Because she has her toes out so much, she can push her knees out very much. She can get the bar very close to the hips. So that means that she can get very upright with her torso. It becomes a lot lighter on the back. It's a lot heavier on the legs in the lift off. It's easier on the back. So that might be a factor. I don't know if that's a reason why she's doing it or because it's something with the shape of the hips. Anatomy is also a thing. Those are just a few considerations. And when you see this, like, okay, is this ideal? Well, textbook wise, it is not. But again, contextualize. Maybe there's a mobility issue, or what Susanna said, maybe the person is more comfortable with a different position. Regarding the other thing, as Susanna mentioned about the stance width, the easiest thing I usually give people is you want to go from your strongest pulling position to your strongest squatting position. For most people, that means heels under the hips when they start, assuming their mobility is good, and heels under the shoulders when they land. So that's a very small difference with feet out. That's what you see in most high-level lifters as well. But there are certainly exceptions. I've even seen people who jump in with the feet. There's people who stay roughly in the same position. And there's a lot of leeway there to play around with it. Just keep in mind that the basic position is stacked joints, because then you can transfer force more efficiently. Any questions on this so far?
I don't think so. I haven't seen anything yet.
Good.
Type fast. I got a note from Frank, so that's good.
Good. And guys, don't hold back on the questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I mean, I think there are stupid questions, but I won't hold it against you.
Can you repeat that about feet under the hips and feet under the shoulders?
Yeah. The short version is stacked joints have less torque on the joints sideways. So that's the thing I mentioned about the shoulder. Right now, the weight is far away from me. I hold a dumbbell here. Now it's close. So this costs me more energy than this. Mm-hmm. Now imagine that my arm is my knee. This is my knee. This is my ankle. If it's on top of each other, I don't have to put in a lot of effort to keep it from wobbling. But if it is not stacked, so my knee goes inward, it costs me extra energy to get that knee out. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of torque sideways going on throughout the joints. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So basically, the more torque there is somewhere, the more force you need to provide. The more force you need to provide, the stronger you need to be. So the stronger you are, the more you can get away with. So some people say you can't compensate technique with strength. Well, you certainly can. It's not very efficient, but it's certainly possible. So if someone, for some reason, has a theoretically suboptimal position, they can probably compensate for it by getting stronger. Is that the best way to go about it? That depends. But yeah, it's certainly possible. So not everyone needs perfect technique. Sometimes you just need to get stronger. All right. If no one has any questions, we're going to go to the next video. We're just going to click one higher. You'll see Anaïs Michel, a very light lifter from France. And I want you guys to look at the first lift she does right at the start of the video. She does an 80 kilo snatch. First, the normal speed, and there's a slow-mo right behind it. You want to challenge yourself, only look at the fast video. But if you're not very experienced in looking at lifts, you could also take a look at the slow motion right after. And I want you to look at it a few times and see what occurs to you when you look at the lift. You could cheat even more by using YouTube's half speed function. I want you guys to tell me what you guys see. And in a bit, I will share my screen. And although video is not very fluid, I can show you a few stills of the lift. And we're going to run you guys through the whole lift. It's a good angle to watch from. So we're going to go through it step by step and see what occurs to us here. I'm basically going to analyze the lift from start to finish. So even for those who do not have a lot of experience in coaching and stuff, looking at it from the start will probably help you get some insight in, okay, what are you supposed to do in a lift? Let's see, jumping backwards. Yes, that is true. Good. Collapses in her catch, leans back, bars far from the body, jumps back a bit. All right, very good. Looks very good from the floor. Weight ends up behind her. Hips sagging and catch. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you. Let's see there. And if I'm not mistaken, you should now be able to see the video. We're going to go through it step by step, and we're going to see if we can discover the things you guys mentioned in the comments, right? Team says?
Yes.
All right. So you see the starting position here. So what are we looking for in the starting position? A straight back, obviously. Well, that's fine. She's fairly low with the hips. That makes it very hard to get out of it, but it's certainly not too low because as you can see, the shoulders are slightly in front of the bar. It's a bit low to my taste, but certainly not bad. Knees are in front of the bar. Bar is roughly over the ball of the foot. So overall, this is pretty good. So what happens when she lifts it up? She lifts. And what you see, what she does very well as she lifts it up is that she maintains her back angle. So she doesn't have like a big stripper move or anything. So far, pretty good. The bar is still close to her. However, she's very much on the heels. How do you see that? Because of the torso angle, she's fairly upright. But you can also see at some points that her toes are wiggling. Her toes are coming up. In this still, it's not very visible. But if the toes come up, that means she's very much on her heels. So what does it mean when she's on her heels? Well, that means that the balance is slightly backward. So slightly further into the movement. So far, it seems to be quite okay. Her shoulders are still over the bar. She does seem to be scraping a bit against the leg. Scraping means friction. Friction means decelerating. So ideally, you don't want friction there. Some people even advocate keeping distance between the bar and the leg. Some people say you need to keep contact. Well, I usually say as close as you can without scraping. That's probably the easiest thing to mention. Let's see if I can. Why is my YouTube being a problem? Oh, nope, go back. I'm gonna go slightly back. Even further back. There we go. All right, so this is her power position where the bar is in the hip and where she goes for a final extension of the hips and the knees. As you can see, she's pretty far on the ball of the foot. Now, I'm okay with the heels coming up a bit early, only if the balance is good. Now, is her balance good? In the power position here, we see her shoulders behind the bar. I'm going to see him like directly on top of the bar, not in front anymore, just straight up. she's already leaning back a bit. I'm not sure who it was. I thought it was Cora or Daphne. One of them said like, hey, she's leaning back in the pool. Well, she is. And because she's leaning back, she's getting on her toes super early. Why? Because if she's on her heels and she's leaning back, she would just fall over, right? Imagine that you're standing on your heels with a heavy weight, like a deadlift, and you're leaning back, you're just going to fall over. So she's moving very fast. She's leaning back, so she compensated for that by getting on her toes. But now the whole balance is back. This is what we call the barbell lifter complex. So the lifter, the athlete, and the barbell together form one whole. They form a complex. It is now behind the center of balance, because where is the pressure point? The pressure point is here. The pressure point is on the ball of the foot. The whole barbell lifter complex is now behind that point, behind that pressure point. So all she can do from here is jump back. So then this happens. There's quite a lot of distance. However, I'm not too worried about the distance itself. Why? Because the bar is still pretty much above the place where the feet originally were. So if you imagine a square from the feet going all the way up, and you want the bar to be roughly in that square, the barbell is pretty much still there. It's not that the barbell goes out in front, which I usually consider an issue. It's that she leans back a lot. So yeah, from there, she makes her pull. That's fine. And then here she goes down. You can already see on the way down here that her right knee collapses. This might be a weakness on one side. This might be asymmetry in mobility. I'm not sure. But of course, if you're already in an asymmetrical position and you have 80 kilos collapsing on it, she's probably going to collapse even harder when she gets into it. Yeah. So as you can see here, she bounces down into it and her right knee collapses even further. Is this a problem? Well, what do you guys think? Well, let me see if there's anyone with comments that need addressing. I'm going to stop share so I can actually read what's going on. Does she hit full extension? Oh, good question. Alex, I'm going to get back to your question in a bit. Because that's a very good, but also a very important question to ask. But first, let's go into it'll mess her knee up in the long run. Why will it mess her knee up in the long run? An ideal position to stand way up, a lot of pressure on the inside of the knee. I'm mostly curious about why would it mess her knee up in the long run. I'm going to play devil's advocate here a bit because I especially want you guys to think about why you're saying what you're saying. Because the more you understand things, the better you can place things in context, the better you can, the better you can coach people in the end. So I'm probably going to question all of these things that you're going to say throughout the next half hour or so. Give Alex a moment to type stuff. Daphne says not an ideal position to stand the weight up. Yes, this is true from a biomechanics standpoint. So we mentioned earlier about the stacked joints thing. Well, her joints are not stacked. Everything is all over the place, especially the right knee. So yes, that is certainly not ideal. However, leg strength is usually not an issue when standing up from a snatch. Thijs also mentioned she can't really use the strength of her right knee now. Well, to a lesser extent, yes, she can probably exert less force than she normally can because there's, again, no stacked joints. That makes it harder to provide force. However, because how much can you really snatch compared to your back squat? If we're purely looking at leg strength, way less. If you can do 2/3 of your back squat, you're already doing very well, excessively well, actually. So for a lot of people, standing up from it is not the issue. So even if your position is not ideal, it's true, but it's probably not a big issue. A lot of pressure on the inside of the knee. Yes, hard to get up again with knees going inside. Yes, that kind of relates to the thing earlier. You are a lot less efficient, but you're still there. You're still able to get up. The upper body does not twist, Funk says. Torso is in control. Yes, that's also an important thing because if one of the knees falls in, if you're asymmetrical, there's a bigger chance that the rest of the whole barbell lifter complex will twist. So it's quite possible that if your one knee caves in, the whole body will do this and you might lose your lift or even sprain the lower back or something. That's certainly possible. The bar is still straight. Yeah, it's probably related to the same thing. Let's see. Let's see. So Alex says she's catching more of the weight on the right knee. Yes, if the right knee collapses, there's a bigger chance that she's leaning on the right knee. So yes, you get uneven load, not engaging the muscles, and therefore the tendons take the pressure. So that's a bit of a complicated one because the tendons are what transfer the force from the muscle to the bone. So when you bounce, which is what we do in weightlifting, not in all sports, but in weightlifting, we actively try to get the deepest position in the snatch, and we actively bounce in the clean. So we use the tendons because the tendons can store elastic force. So that means that if you hit the tendons, so if you bounce in the bottom of the squat, you can use that elastic force to get up way harder. Both the muscles and the tendons can store elastic force. But the thing is, the point you're making here, because you're catching more of the weight on the right knee, as Alex says, basically muscles and tendons can take anything as long as they are adapted to that load. So if you ask someone who has never done let's say that someone has only done perfect squats, knee in line with the toes, textbook squat, and you ask that person to snatch or overhead squat like this, there's a big chance they're going to hurt their tendons because they're not used to it. If the person is used to it, like you see with most weightlifters who build up to this like over a period of years and years and years, you will see that they can have immense weights on this. I've personally never seen an elite level weightlifter have an acute injury, which is often the fear that your knees will twist, even because your knee is slightly rotated. I have never ever seen a weightlifter, I think, on international platform where they hurt their knee that way. But it does put a lot of strain on the knee. That is true. So again, place it in context. If someone is accustomed to it, they can get away with a lot of stuff. But most of us are not training people who are accustomed to this from a young age. Most of us train normal people. And if normal people do an overhead squat like in this video, yes, Alex, I 100% agree. There's a big chance they're going to hurt themselves. So basically the premise is do not put strain on your body that is not accustomed to. This is the reason why some people can have their knees come in a squat and feel nothing, and other people have a slight deviation and it hurts their knee, right? So basically it's about the tissue tolerance and the tissue load you put on it. And that makes it a bit tricky. We're not going to go into injuries too much because it gets more complicated if you look at all the different elements that go into injury. So there's the physical part, there's a mental part, psychological, and there's a neurological part that makes it even more complicated. But for now, I would keep in mind that the beginners, and most people we train, which are in weightlifting term beginners, should probably err on the safe side and should not have too much leeway with moving the knees. If people are accustomed to this for years without issues, they could probably get away with a lot more leeway. So yeah, that's the short version. Daphne says that an overhead squat is more to it than just leg strength. It's also about your balance. Yes, that's 100% true. And that relates to what Alex says about catching more of the weight on the right knee. So like I mentioned, if the weight is more on the right knee, there's more of a chance of doing this. There is also a chance of overloading the right knee because if both knees are relatively strong and sturdy, but you still overload the right one more in your snatches, you can still hurt the right knee, obviously. So I hope that kind of explains what I'm trying to say here. Bad technique, as most people say, is not a guarantee for bad technique. But bad or inconsistent technique does place you at a bigger risk for putting more strain on certain joints in certain positions. And sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not, right? And you don't always know that beforehand, so you might want to err on the safe side. This is also a reason why I'm not always too worried about people with slight knee cave on the squat. Depends on the balance on the feet. Like, are they on the inside of the feet, which increases strain on the knee? Are they on the whole foot? Stuff like that. So sometimes, yes, you need to say knees out. Sometimes pushing the knees out only causes more issues. All right. Any questions so far on this lift or anything we have talked about before? Otherwise, I'm going to get into Alex's question about, is she extending?
Daphne, I don't know if you really got into that, but she mentions that in an overhead squat, it's more than just leg strength. It's also about balance.
Yeah, that's what we mentioned earlier, because that related to what Alex said about.
Oh, I'm
throwing
sorry.
one
I
knee.
thought she meant this something else. Yeah, got it.
If she does mean something else, then please elaborate. Thijs asked, is it her normal technique or was this a wrong catch, but she managed to save it? I'm not sure. I have not seen, aside from this particular lift, I have not seen her lift in years. She's been in the game for like 10 years or something. So I'm not sure. I would have to look at more of her lifts. But as far as I know, she does have a very deep squat position, like you see in this video. So I wouldn't be surprised, but it's also possible that it's just a small deviation, or maybe it's something she developed over time. Because it might be a mobility thing. Maybe her right ankle is stiffer than her left ankle. Maybe she injured her left knee at some point, and that's why she's leaning towards her right knee. Maybe her glute medius, the side of your butt muscles. Maybe she's weaker there on the right side, and that's why the knee collapses. Maybe during the pull, if one shoulder blade is more active than the other, you pull harder on one side, you kind of lean to one side during the pull. There's a lot of things there, and the only way to know that is if you do more. You have to look at more lifts and do some assessments and so on. Frank asks, what if the right ankle is more mobile? Would you say bounce less and get a higher catch position? This depends on a lot of factors. If it's more mobile, you could say, well, work on your left ankle mobility. You could say catch it higher, but at some point it's not going to work because in a snatch, if you go maximum effort, you want to meet the bar where it's at. So if the bar is high, you catch it high. But if it gets heavier, the bar gets lower and lower and lower. You have to catch it lower. So what you're saying here is have a higher catch position. For a weightlifter, that automatically means use less weight. If you're at the Olympics, that's probably not an option. If it's a beginner, then yes, I would say fix your left ankle mobility, and instead of bouncing, just do deep power snatches, for example. But again, that depends on the context. More on this one. All right, if you have more questions, put them down. Otherwise, I'm gonna go into Alex's question, like, did she have a good extension? Let's see here. If I'm not mistaken, you guys see it again. Work with me, YouTube. Slightly earlier. All right, slightly later. There we go. All right, so does she have good extension? Well, yes, because the extension I'm looking for is the ankle, knee, and hip need to be in line, straight down when she extends. Her hips are slightly behind because she's leaning back so far, but this is the extension I'm looking for. Could she extend her knees a little bit more? Possibly. Maybe if I fast forward like 100 nanoseconds, she's going to extend her knees a bit more. I'm not sure. But basically, this is a good extension. How far do the hips need to extend? Well, this depends. Some athletes stay relatively vertical, whereas she leans back more. If you look at Wu Jungbao is a Chinese athlete. I think he was Olympic champion, or he came in second a few years ago, not sure. He leans back even further. He's like somewhere around here when he snatches. So what do some people say? You need to open the hips more, extend the hips more hips, slam the hips into the bar. What happens is that the hips go not over the knee and ankle, but the hips will be in front. So you kind of get this banana shape, and the bar is slammed out in front. That's why you see people looping the bar out, which is what you don't want. The extension is vertical, but because you need to make space for the bar, you pull your chest up, and there's going to be a little bit of hyperextension in the hip. If you lean back, or you have a very big back extension going on here, you don't even need to extend the hips that much, but there's always going to be like a big extension here. That's a triple extension we always talk about. And depending on style and position and stuff, there's going to be a little bit more or less hyperextension in the hip. Overall, I would say this is good. This is certainly a good lift. I would rather see someone go backwards than forwards when lifting. But of course, I would rather see going up and down, because any force that is applied forward or backward is force that is not ideally used upwards. So yeah, she's not showing textbook technique. I wouldn't say it's a bad lift. It's just not how I would teach most people. This is not like the textbook basic framework that I would teach people. Cool. Cecily, were there any questions, or are we going to go to the next one?
I think it is loading. No, no more questions.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing for a bit. Let's see. Then please go back to the playlists. We're gonna go to the next video, one up. Andrei Rybakov from Belarus, a few years back. I think he quit. Yeah, I think this is one of his last competitions. Look at the video a few times. It's slow motion, so extra easy for you guys. See what occurs to you after watching the lift a few times. And after that, I want you guys to tell me what you guys see, and we will go into the whole analyze the lift and so on, right? And we'll go through piece by piece, but first, let you guys see, tell me what do you guys see. Lands on the ball of the feet. Yes, hips shoot up in the pull. Yes, so that's what we call the stripper move. When someone lifts the weight off the floor, the hips come up. Yep, Tatjana mentioned that. The stripper move, yes. Or shooting hips. Shooting hips is like the neat adult way to say it, and stripper move is just what I say. Or stripper booty. Gets into a decent hang. All right, we'll get into that later on while we analyze the whole thing. Anyone else going once, going twice?
Decent hang.
Stands on the front. Tatjana, you mentioned he stands on the front of his foot instead of the whole foot. At what part of the lift do you mean? Yeah. Early arm bend, weight shifts forward. Ah, yes, all right. That's good. Yeah, what I really like here is you guys actually see a lot of stuff. Don't know what my stance on early arm bend. What is my stance on early arm bend? Well, I mean, for bigger biceps, you are going to need some arm bend. So in that sense, sure. But yeah, we'll get into that in a bit as well. You're just going to analyze the whole thing. And if you have some time left after that, we'll do another video. And if anyone wants, I will let them take the mic and let them do the whole analysis step by step. All right, I think we got everything. But I think I can get behind what everyone is saying. Now let's see how everything goes. I want you guys to think of the reverse engineering for a bit. So some of you guys said, like Dennis mentioned, bar goes forward. Cora mentions weight shifts forwards in the catch. Who else? Daphne mentions landing on the ball of the feet. All of those things are true. However, why does that happen? When that relates to stuff that happens earlier. So now we're going to see how those things that Daphne and Dennis mentioned, how that relates to things that Frank and Tatjana mentioned about hips shooting up. So I'm going to share my screen once more. And we are going to, there we go. All right. So right now he's super low in the starting position, but this is his resting position. He's not actually trying to lift the weight here. This is where he starts to lift the weight. Now, if you look at the position, his shoulders are slightly behind the bar. You can see that here. You cannot properly lift if you're behind the bar. Why? Because the bar is attached to your hands. Your hands are attached to your wrists, to your elbows, to your shoulders, to your shoulder blades. Not the shoulders, the shoulder blades. That means that the bar is trying to move in the direction of the shoulder blades. If you are sitting behind the bar like this, the bar will try to go backwards. It cannot go backwards because there's a shin in the way too, actually. So what will automatically, inevitably happen this way? If it's super light, you can pull the bar forward around the knee, which you sometimes see happen. But what is more likely, he's going to have a stripper move. So hopefully he pulls himself into a proper position, but not really, because this would be good, but he's going to go way further up into a big stripper move. Now let's see it. Look at this position. If you look at this, he is slightly forward. So what Frank mentioned, he's actually, this looks like a pretty good hang position, save for one thing. His shoulders are now so far in front of the bar that he is leaning pretty much forward on the ball of his foot. You can kind of see his heels coming up here. Not ideal. So what happens afterwards? Here he's trying to adjust himself, but the whole barbell lifter complex is now slightly forward. Remember what I said about the barbell and the athlete? They form one whole, and that whole needs to stay above a certain center of gravity. Whole with a W in front, Cecily. She's laughing at me. However, when you need to stay around that center of gravity. If not, you're going to jump forward or backward. So what happens here, he's trying to go into his power position. He's already forward. Because the bar was forward, because the whole center of balance was suddenly shifted forward, he had to bring his hips to the bar. Normally, you bring your bar into the hips, right? So you get to that nice power position, a place where you explode upwards. But he gets his bar towards the hips. His hips towards the bar. He goes forward with his hips. So he's kind of kettlebell swinging it while he's standing on his toes. That might be the best way to visualize it. Imagine he has a kettlebell swing between, he's doing that, a kettlebell swing between his knees, up forward while he's standing on the ball of his foot. Why does he bend his arms? Probably because he's so far forward. If you would straighten out his arms, the bar would be even further forward. So he's kind of trying to stay balanced, I assume. Either that, or he's trying to find tension. That's also a possibility. Or he's rushing the movement. That's another reason why people sometimes bend their arms early. But the arm bend is very small, so I'm not too worried about that here. So he extends. Yep. Slightly back. So what happens here is everything's going forward. You can see how super upright he is. He's not really making space for the bar. He doesn't have to, because he just hit the bar out in front. So what happens if the bar goes out in front and you pull properly on that bar? You go forward, and then you see how he had to jump forward. But that means that as the bar came down, he had a forward orientation as well. So he's already slightly forward on the ball of his foot, and then there's 175 kilos pressing on top of him while he's leaning forward, right? So what happens? He bounces on the ball of his foot a bit, but the guy's super strong, so he stands up, right? So that's the analysis in slow motion. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions on this specifically. Stop sharing. There we go. I think we've gone through all the things you guys mentioned. Yes. Good. Anyone else? Otherwise, we're going to go to the next video. Is the early arm bent? Yes, an early arm is certainly bent. I'm sorry, that was probably not your question. Possibly. Yeah, so I mentioned like there are several reasons why someone might have an early arm bend when they're pulling. It could be because you're over the bar too far. Because if you're very far forward, and the bar is going along with you, you're going to fall over. So you can bend the arms to keep the bar closer to that center line of gravity that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, it's certainly possible. It's one of the things you can look for. If you see someone has an early arm bend, one of the things you can look for is, are they over the bar, exaggerating it, or leaning over the bar and on the toes? Another thing you can look for is, are they way too early with getting their torso upright? That's also possible. So yeah, that's just something you'll have to judge from different aspects of the lift. All right, I see no more questions. I want to see if I can share a video of Marjolein with you guys and if it actually works this time. Let's see if it works. I want to do the next one. There we go. You guys don't see it?
Well, I can see it, but it's very early. I only see like 4 shots of the entire snatch.
All right, so if you guys can't see this properly, we're just going to analyze Marjolein frame by frame. This makes you uncomfortable, Marjolein? Too bad. All right. So let's just go through this frame by frame. What do you guys see when you see this lift? What's the first thing that occurs to you? Cecily will have to help me out here because I can't see the actual comments from people.
Marjolein is being very nice about us analyzing her lift. So that's everything so far. Come on, guys.
There's at least one thing you guys need to be able to spot here. Athlete sends you this video.
I've got Daphne who has a comment on the full lift, which is a high catch, then writes it down. Tatjana says butt is a bit high. Suzanne says the same. And Skora says shoulders should be a little bit more over the bar. Frank says inside edge of the feet.
All right. So
arms could be wider.
Before I go into all those things, the very first thing that should occur to you as a weightlifting coach, but possibly not as a CrossFit coach, is she's not wearing weightlifting shoes. Now, why is that such a big issue? Because weightlifting shoes have an elevated heel. An elevated heel means that all the joint angles will change. It makes a very significant difference in the starting position of the pull, but also in the catch. Now, is that an issue? That depends. If Marjolein is a CrossFitter, who just wants to be, overall fit, have fun in training, that would be fine. But if someone comes to me and says, I want to do competitions in Olympic weightlifting, I want to get the highest snatch and clean jerk I can get, I would certainly tell that person to get weightlifting shoes, because it does make a difference. Even those who are super mobile, which is almost every top weightlifter, even they use weightlifting shoes as well. Those shoes are sturdy. Those shoes are because they have the elevated heel, they have a proper tight fit as much as you need it. So yeah, that's the first thing. But for Marjolein, we'll cut her some slack. We'll say, okay, you're a CrossFitter, we'll accept this. As for the comments, let's go through those. Daphne says high catch, then write it down. Yeah, that's true. We mentioned this earlier in the webinar when Marjolein was the one who had to question, like, hey, how do I actually catch the bar deeper? And like I said, what could be fear of going under the bar. It could be that you're putting too much effort into it. If you're putting 30 kilos of effort into a 25 kilo bar, of course, it's going to be a power snatch, right? Otherwise, you're just going to throw it overhead. So it could be an effort matches intensity thingy. So there's a few things there. We'll see if we can find a technical thing, but maybe it's just a matter of intent. So intent is like, are you actually trying to get under the bar down that way? And if it's a fear thing, maybe you should exercise like snatch balances to get more comfortable with it, or drop snatches, or pressing drop snatch, stuff like that. I see two inappropriate comments, one about her ass and one about her butt. That's a very interesting one. Because is her butt really that high? Let's take a look at her position. Is the barbell roughly over the ball of the foot or behind the toes? Yes. Are her knees on top or slightly in front of the bar? Yes. Are her shoulders roughly between the bar and the knees, or roughly over the bar? Yes. So basically everything seems to be in order here. Now her hips seem to be very high. That could be a style thing. A lot of American lifters teach a higher hip position because that makes it lighter getting it off the floor. The only thing is you have to adjust your position somewhere along the way so you get more vertical, right? You have to make sure your balance is still proper. So that's one thing. Could be a style thing. It could be a build thing, like anthropometry. Maybe your upper legs are longer or shorter, or your arms are relatively short or long. That makes a difference in what position you will be in. There's personal preference, there's mobility. Maybe she cannot go further down because her ankles are too stiff. That could also play a role. But overall, I would say it looks pretty good. Get different shoes, but other than that, I would say this looks pretty good. Shoulders could be a bit more over the bar. Maybe. I think this is good, but maybe if we look from the side, it could be a bit more in front. That's interesting because if the shoulders are going more over the bar, that means your hips are going to come up even further. So now I need to see a fight to the death between Cora against Tatjana and Susanne, because Tatjana and Susanne think her butt is high, but Cora thinks the shoulders should be more over the bar, which means the butt goes even higher. Bring it on. Guys, Cora is fucking tall, and she's also gotten pretty strong over the last year. So yeah, I'm not gonna butt in there. Right. So now you see that there's a lot of different views, even though you guys all have a point. You don't want the ass to be that too high because it changes the lift fundamentally. But you also don't want the shoulders to be behind the bar. We saw in the previous video from Rybakov what happened. So you need to be able to adjust it on the person. That's the whole contextualized thing. And it kind of makes coaching very hard because otherwise everyone will read a book and know how to do weightlifting. Inside edge of the feet, yes. I think that is related to her ankle mobility. We'll get into that later on. Arms could be wider. Thighs, I'm not sure. It depends. She needs to get the bar into her hips at the power position. If she cannot do that with straight arms, if the bar is too low, then yes, she needs to get her arms wider. We'll see in a bit if that happens. All right. So let's see what she does. Not that fast. There. This position. What do we think here? So the part crossing the knee. This is where I often see a lot of issues happening. This is the part where Anaïs Michel, the lady that jumped backwards, was on the heel too much. That's why she jumped backwards. This is the part where Rybakov was balanced so far forward that he started pulling with his arms and leaning on the ball of his foot before he jumped forward. What about Marilène? Is she like properly balanced? Or is she ready to kettlebell swing the bar out in front? Or is she going to jump back? Like I said, everything that happens in weightlifting is determined by what happens before that. So maybe from what happens here, you can take a guess at what happens next. Gonna give you guys a few seconds, otherwise I'm going to spoil it. Film says looks good. Yeah. Good, finally some positivity, guys. Yeah. Remember, when you're coaching, when you're cueing, it doesn't all have to be bad. You don't always have to tell people that they suck. I mean, I know I do that all the time. But sometimes, yes, I think at this position, what Wilm says is a good cue. Looks good. Or keep doing what you're doing. Seems well balanced. Shoulders and hips rose at the same speed. Yeah, it was pretty good. She's a bit more on the front foot. Yes, to some extent. And it's a bit of a style thing, and it depends on your build, to what extent you're on the front foot or the back foot. But you need to get on the whole foot. If you're too much on the heels or too much are on the front of the foot, we've seen what happens. There's a bigger chance of everything going forward or backward. So she may be a bit more on the front of the foot. I think it's pretty good. She's over the bar. She's not scraping against her leg as far as I can see. She seems to be balanced on her foot. I don't see her heels or toes rising. What Frank says is right. Looks good, but she needs to get more vertical to get a good power position. Yeah, that's right. If her back angle stays like this, she will start kettlebell swinging it out later. So imagine that she has a kettlebell between her knees right now. All she has to do is stay in that position and squeeze her butt, and the kettlebells will go in front. However, she needs to get up because you don't want it to go in front. You want the barbell to go upward. So let's see if we can see afterwards. Frank is going to be happy as her torso coming up further. Yeah, she's getting up more. Power position. All right. So what do we see here? I think, not sure who it was. Thijs. Yeah. Her arms could probably be slightly wider because if you see now, her shoulders are slightly forward. She needs to keep those back. Her elbows are slightly bent. It's very minor. But even then, it seems to be slightly below the crease of the hip. So it's not bad, but she probably needs to get her arms slightly wider. Susanna says legs are bent and her feet are still on the floor. Oh yeah, I think what you're referring to, Susanna, is the actual extension. She's not extended yet. She's right before it. So her legs need to be bent here and her feet need to stay on the floor here because this is where she needs to extend from. I think you're referring to the actual pull. And yes, then she needs to extend and get her feet off the floor. And I hope, of course, that she's going to do that 1.5 seconds from now. Tatjana says knees are a bit more leaning to the inside. Yes, and that kind of relates to what Frank said earlier. Like she had a tendency to be on the inside of the foot. So that could be a ankle mobility thing, because if she now pushes her knees out, she needs some ankle mobility for that. If she doesn't have that, she can't get her knees out. It also explains why in the starting position, she was on the inside of her foot instead of pushing her knees out, putting her more on the whole foot. So yeah, let's see if that also happens in the squat, because you need a lot of ankle mobility for the overhead squat. especially if you do not have weightlifting shoes. Frank says maybe there's some torque from keeping the knees out, maybe a background in jumping sport, volleyball. Not sure. Marjolein, you can weigh in if you wish, if you have a background in that. No. But yes, I do believe she is working on keeping the knees out. So the torque is there. For those that don't know, torque is like the rotational force that you're applying to a joint. But in this particular case, the torque is there, but the position is not there. So it's not textbook, but she can probably still get away with this. Now we're going to see if Susanna's issue is present here. Is she actually going to extend her legs and move her feet? So let's see what happens. She extends. Now you see her arms are slightly bent before her knees are extended. So she's a bit early with the arms. Maybe not a big issue. It's not textbook, but you know, it's not always an issue. Let's see if we go a bit further. Her extension. She extends the knees, hips, and ankles are pretty much in one line. She makes space with her chest. The bar seems to be pretty close. It's a pretty good extension. What?
She just doesn't look very happy. Sorry, Marjolein. Meest elegante stil.
Can someone screenshot this and send this to Marjolein for her birthday? So yeah, nobody looks happy in a lift.
Zeker waar.
I do look happy. I usually look surprised or happy in a lift. Nah, never mind. I'm not going to show you guys my video now. So yeah, is there anything that occurs to people here? Aside from all the things I mentioned, I think the extension is pretty good. This is a good example of a very upright torso, but because the rest is pretty good, the extension is pretty good, even though she's not hyperextending her hips very much, like some other lifters do. Neither is necessarily good or bad. They just have slightly different emphasis in mechanics. I agree, the channel looks very good. There's one small thing that you see here is there's quite a lot of distance between her feet and the floor. The left side. Not sure. Cora asked if the left side came off the floor first. Didn't see that. Quite possible. Relates to what I mentioned on the video of Anaïs Michel. It's quite possible that if you have an uneven pull somehow, it can have a lot of influence on the lift. Could be the shoulder blade thing. Could be that one of your hips is stronger than the other one. Could be a lot of stuff. So that's possible. Could also be the camera angle, by the way. You can see there's quite some distance between the feet and the floor. Is that an issue? Well, she's fully extended. Once you are fully extended, there is no more vertical force you can impart into the bar with your lower body because you're already extended. Just like when you're jumping, once you've left the floor, you can't push against the floor anymore. Once you have done that, there is no reason to be in the air. As soon as you have pushed against the floor and extended, you need to be on your way down. She has some distance here. That means her body was moving up when she should have been moving down. This is a bit of a detail, right? This is not something you're going to worry about with a beginner or even possibly some intermediates. But for someone who is a bit further, you want to teach the person to go down faster. Marjolein was also the person who asked us, like, how do I get under the bar faster? Well, if you literally jump into the air, which is what she's doing now, then you're going to lose a bit of time that you could have used to get under the bar. So is this a bad lift? No, so far I think everything looks pretty awesome, even though she's not wearing proper shoes. She's actually doing a very good job. However, she is probably going to be inefficient with getting under the bar. So, next up, let's see what happens here. Bar's closed, she goes down. Let's see what happens here. Basically, if she would just push a bit harder with her shoulder blades and her triceps or elbows, she would already have the bar here. It would be a power snatch. Now, what occurs to us in this position? Aside from the fact that it's a power snatch and she wanted to do a full snatch. So she should have caught it deeper. She was into the air, very long. She gave too much power into the bar. Sure. What do we see here? We can go into all sorts of details, but yeah, arms are slightly bent, but that might fix itself slightly later. I'm not sure. Yeah, to some extent. Not sure if she can extend her arms more. If your shoulder blades are slightly stiff, it might be a limitation on how far you can extend the elbows. And you see that in wide grip especially. Although it does happen on narrow grip as well to some extent. But it could also be the shoulder instead of the shoulder blade. Well, there's one obvious thing here. I've given a few hints earlier on in the analysis. Toes are a bit up. Yes, I'm not sure if that's because of the shoes or because she's actually trying to be on the heels too much. But yeah, it could be a thing. Some people catch it on the heels too much because they're taught to squat on the heels and they fall backwards. That happens. Center of balance seems good. Yeah, I think the channel is right. The toes may be a little up, but if the center of balance is good, that doesn't have to be an issue. The reason why I don't like the toes coming up with most people is because it is often a symptom of being on the heels too much. So yeah, good call. Yes, inward tendency in ankles and knees, because there's a very big inward line of the knee compared to the line of the toes here. So I would suspect, because it's such a recurring thing, that it is a mobility thing and not just a technique or a strength thing. Not sure if that's the case, but quite probably yes. Because now the ankle doesn't have to bend as far. She can just get her knees in. And then she goes further down, and you'll see her knees. See, she pushed them out. She's pushing it out because here she was getting them in. She goes down, she tries to push them out at some point. Here, she pushes them out, and then they come back in again. So it's not like she's not trying. And now to get back to what Alex said earlier about a bigger chance of hurting the knee, Marjolein is not in the Olympics. And even though I think she made a pretty nice lift here, she may be at a slightly higher risk of hurting herself if she does this with heavy weights often. If she eases into it, perhaps not. A bigger risk even is with people who pick up technique very fast and are already pretty strong by nature or from their athletic background, but don't have like the load tolerance in the tissue that I mentioned. So imagine this. You have someone who has done a certain sport, maybe a martial art or swimming or any other sport in the past, and it already leaves them with good body control, so they pick up the technique very fast. It leaves them with a lot of strength. So they pick up a barbell, and it's actually a new movement pattern. So they get a lot of impact because snatches and cleans and heavy squats and bouncing, and then they get the knee in, like Marjolein has here. Imagine what that does to the knee. In that particular case, then I would be very worried about the knees, and I would take a way slower approach with these people in building tolerance, paused squats, no bouncing, power snatch plus overhead squat instead of full snatches all the time, maybe a bit lower frequency of the main lifts. You would want to build up what those Chinese kids have been learning from the age of 6. That's what these people need to learn first. But if you're not naturally super strong, Marjolein has a background in endurance training, as far as I recall. She did not have that strength base. She had to learn the technique from scratch and so on. So is Marjolein at a bigger risk for hurting her knee this way? Maybe slightly, but depending on her genetics, which is also a factor, of course. At least she's not going to use super heavy weights in the snatch and the clean. So I'm not too worried, but still worried enough that I would tell her to get some good shoes or fix her ankle mobility, or both. Cool. Let's see if she's properly balanced. She comes up. Her heels seem to come up slightly, but I think too extreme. That's pretty good.
Did you see Dennis's question?
Let me see. No. Besides mobility, couldn't be a lack of strength or activation of glute medius in this position. Yes, certainly possible. It could even be a weakness of the quads, because the glute medius, people see it as an extensor, an external rotator, because it pushes the knees out, which is true. That's one of the functions. But in a slightly internally rotated position, which means if the knees are slightly in, it also functions in extending the hip and standing up. So that means that if you get your knees in slightly, the glute medius can help with stepping up out of a squat, which is one of the reasons why people have their knees cave in so much. Is that a good thing? Well, I have heard at least one coach say that it's a good thing to have your knees come in a little bit. I don't subscribe to that point of view, but I can see why he's saying that. Okay, goodbye, Daphne. You're welcome. So could it be a lack of strength or activation of glute medius? Yes. The term activation, I don't normally use that term because activation of something, in all the cases I've seen, are usually a matter of lack of strength or lack of technique. Because if a muscle doesn't activate, that happens when you have a torn nerve, for example. If you sever a nerve, you cannot activate the muscle. But it's quite possible that it's weak or the technique is off. Because if you push your knees out, you automatically activate your glute medius. You cannot push your knees out without activating your glute medius or the piriformis and the obturator and all the other muscles that externally rotate. So it could be relatively weak, that's possible, but you can't really perform the movement without the muscle being active. But it could be weak, your technique could be off. So in that sense, you could not activate the muscle, I guess. So that's something you'd have to test with her. And the easiest thing for her is just like do an ankle test or sit at the bottom of a squat, overhead squat. Goodbye, Susanna. Hope you guys learned something from this. Feedback and questions always welcome on my email address and stuff. Push the knees out at the bottom, see if you can manage that. If not, it's an ankle issue. If you can do that, then yes, it might be an activation / strength / technique issue. Yeah, certainly. More, any questions on this? Otherwise, we're going to close off soon. I'm going to stop sharing. Marlene always had issues with her ankles in squats. Yeah, so in this case, she already knows what it is. All right, I'm going to stick around for a minute for anyone who has questions or comments. If you have any feedback on the webinar, because I'm considering doing more of this stuff in the future. If you have any feedback, send me a message and email me at jeremy@unscaredcrossfit.com. I hope you guys learned something, or at least had fun. Either works. You are welcome, Marjolein. Glad to hear it. And of course, if you have any questions regarding anything we discussed, please let me know as well, because then we can just, email, contact, whatever. Thank you, Frank. All right, gonna stick around for a moment and have some of my delicious aspartame. Thank you, Tatjana. Let's see. Well, Thijs, I'm going to have to slightly disappoint you. The other movies in the playlist were used in the previous webinar, but some people that are here were also there last week, so that's why I had different movies. But of course, if there's going to be another webinar, there's probably going to be more movies. Marjolein, what can you do best to improve your ankle mobility? The best thing you can do is send me an email, and you know what? Don't email me. Marjolein, find Squat University. Squat University is from a physical therapist who also does a bit of weightlifting, and he has a bunch of videos on how to improve your mobility, and he also has a very good article. So just Google Squat University ankle mobility, and you should find the article, and I think it has the videos and the pictures and all. Thank you for the comment, Dennis. I'm very happy to hear that it helped. You're welcome, Alex. Yeah, maybe I just need to, be more concise in what I'm explaining. You're welcome, Wilm and Marjolein. Awesome. All right, guys. I'm glad you guys actually found some use in this. Again, send me an email if I can do anything for you. If there's going to be more of these webinars, then you will find out through UnScared, social media, and the daily fitness vitamins, emails, and all that. Tatjana, can I do this with the clean and jerk too? Yes, I can. This was just random. I had a few snatch videos, but yeah, I think we did clean and jerk videos last week as well. So yeah, I can certainly do that with the clean and jerk as well. But again, I have no idea if we're going to do it and if we're going to do it when, but I'm having fun. So yeah, it's probably going to be there. Awesome. Glad you guys are so enthusiastic. If there are no questions, I'm going to kick you all guys all out. I'm going to stop recording.